Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where I talk about the latest episodes of crime dramas that I like. For this episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Elementary. So in this episode, we deal with the kind of the real life superhero community in New York. Specifically, we only see like two superheroes in the entire episode. They don't really reference the community, but they don't really talk about many of them. You only see like two of them in this episode. Essentially, crime this week is a murder, specifically a guy known as the Midnight Ranger was murdered. And it turns out that this character is actually based on a comic book character of the same name. Just a guy going around, fighting crime and trying to help out, help with the whole crime situation in the city. Uh, you know, it was kind of an interesting thing in this episode because because he is from a copywritten IP, because the character is based off a comic book. The company that created it was kind of in conflict with him, which I thought was kind of very interesting. To me personally, I'd look at it as promotional. It's like, oh, you're out there promoting our character, but at the same time, I guess in their eyes, it's like people are going to look at him as just some silly dude out there running around in a costume, and it just hurts their image as the creators of that. I guess also because they're like, he's getting publicity off of something that they own. But essentially, what you end up finding out is that he was killed by the guy that's the editor of Midnight Ranger. That guy is actually the grandson of the guy who created the Midnight Ranger comic books. The reason why he killed him, it wasn't on purpose, it was an accident. It was kind of a struggle that he ended up killing him. Basically, the editor dude was going to go into his the comic book company he worked at, and basically kill everyone because he was kind of entitled. Basically, in the past, the company ripped his grandfather off and took all the rights to the comic, to Ranger. So there was no, they couldn't profit off of it. They lost all rights to it. And basically his grandson has basically been at the company. He's like, oh, Mike, I should be running this company. Like, basically, my family should be rich because the Midnight Ranger, was made by my grandfather. This company stole from him, blah, blah, blah. He's basically going to show up there and kill a lot of people. And the Midnight Ranger showed up and, tried to stop him. And that's how he ended up getting killed in the process. It's kind of sad because, the murderer actually considered the real, the guy behind the mask. I forgot his name, but the editor and the Midnight Ranger were actually friends, so he was actually up. It did affect him. He was apologetic about killing him. Another big part in this episode was Joan was, in this part beginning of the episode, she's kind of collecting clothes for a charity that she's, backing, and basically Moreland signs like a huge check, I think it was like $250,000 to that specific charity. And Joan, being who she is, realizes immediately that it wasn't out of charity that he did it. It wasn't him trying to be a nice guy. She basically essentially says it bluntly, the only reason why you gave that money is because you wanted to, make me feel indebted to you. Basically, he wants her to look for a mole in his company. Basically, there was a deal he was trying to make, and that deal fell apart. And he wanted, he wanted to kind of manipulate Joan into helping him. And Joan initially goes to Sherlock to ask about, whether she should help his dad or not. And Sherlock's like, don't. Because, previously Sherlock had revealed to his dad the name of the guy who shot him. But some time ago, that said shooter broke out of the prison he was already in, and Sherlock can only assume, he believes it was by his father's hand. Obviously not directly. Obviously his father hired someone else to do it, but him doing something like that will put him back in, whoever hired that shooter is going to put a target back on Moreland's back. And then basically Sherlock's like, he didn't want Joan to be around him because his father's already kind of stared up the hornet's nest, and that's going to lead to a lot of danger around him, and that means danger to anyone else that's around him. Joan, without telling Sherlock, she actually, goes to. She initially tells Sherlock she's not. She's like, "You're right. I'm not going to take. I'm not going to help your father." Which secretly she did. She looked over the files or whatever and told him that there was no mole. But the twist is at the very end of the episode, she confronts the guy who actually is the mole, because apparently there was one. But rather than turning him in, Joan is using him as, she's like, there's already a mole, and she's like, I want you to do what you're already doing. You're being a mole for someone else. I want you to be a mole for me. So it's like, what exactly she's going to use him as a mole for? Is it to see all the crap that Moreland's up to? Like what? It's so interesting because I feel like she doesn't, she's not doing this because, I feel like she's doing it out of loyalty to Sherlock, because keeping tabs on what Moreland does means them not getting caught up in any bull, crap he gets involved in, because Moreland's not going to tell them everything that goes down, because he said that he doesn't have that guy, the shooter. He's like, he told her repeatedly, he's like, no, I don't have him. That's just something my son came up with. You can believe him if you want to, but I don't have the guy. So she's not going to she already has a hard enough time believing him about anything, especially even more so now because, like I said, he donated all that money to a charity. She even said herself that you don't even care about, just so I'd feel indebted to you that I'd do this favor for you. It'd be quite interesting to see what she's actually going to do with this mole and what information she's going to get from it. But that was just kind of the main plot stuff. Some other interesting things in this episode. There was some particular little jokes here and there. One being at the very beginning, we have when they're in that comic book company and Sherlock's just looking around, just surprised about it all. And Joan, he was reading up on the origin story of the Midnight Ranger. And Joan's like, okay, you're sitting there telling me, this origin story when you already know I know it. And Sherlock was like, what do you mean? She's like, my brother was a geek. And basically he points to superhero, cutouts of superheroes. And she basically tells him the origin stories of them, which is like, wow. It says a lot. Granted, your brother might be a geek, but it says a lot about Joan too, that she remembers that. But maybe her brother was such a geek that he ended up she can't help but know it. And I love Sherlock's response once he hears everyone's origins. He's like, how are these people not dead by, what was it, he either said radiation poisoning or cancer, which I'm laughing at that. That's kind of a morbid joke to laugh at, but still, you never, that is so true. It's you never really hear, I mean, maybe you do and I'm just unfamiliar with it, but you never really hear about superheroes that when what would give someone superpowers in one moment ends up killing someone else the next. You never heard about Spider-Man dying from being bit by that radioactive spider. It's always, oh, Peter Parker became Spider-Man. Never that. Oh yeah, Peter Parker got bitten by a radioactive spider and died. Cause once again, I'll reiterate, a very morbid type of funny. But there was also that funny moment where Sherlock is kind of he comes face to face with that superhero, the hero that had come to his house because he wanted to help out, find out who killed the Midnight Ranger. And he's, obviously does his Sherlock thing and breaks down all these things he notices about this guy. And the guy's like, how did you know all that stuff? And Sherlock jokes by saying I was bit by a radioactive detective. Now this next part, it kind of contains a spoiler for Sherlock's, the Sherlock Holmes movie, the second one, the one with, the ones with Robert Downey Jr. and Jude Law. Specifically how the second one ends. So if you haven't seen that, I'm sorry, I might spoil it for you. But basically in this, Sherlock had read basically a lot of the Midnight Ranger comic books just to kind of learn more about the character. And he said one of the particular ways that Midnight Ranger dies in some of the comics is that basically he was pushed off a waterfall while embraced with his enemy, and that's how he died. Which to me is is that a reference to the second Sherlock Holmes movie? Because that's kind of how that ended, with him and Moriarty kind of going off the edge near a waterfall, if I'm remembering that correctly. I've only seen the movie once, and that was a little while ago, a couple years ago, so I might not be remembering that clearly, but that if I remember correctly, that's how that. I mean, granted, Sherlock didn't die in that movie, but still, like, is that what that's a reference to, or am I just simply overthinking? I'm thinking I'm probably just overanalyzing it, but it'd be kind of interesting if that was something they just slid in there like that. Maybe it might be something from the books. Maybe I don't know. Would they really kill off Sherlock like that? Not unless it's like something in the Sherlock Holmes lore where there's a particular character that died that way, but I don't know. Like I said, probably most likely just overanalyzing. But that's really all I want to talk about in this episode. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.